Hello, it's Brad Laurie of BlockchainBrad, and today we're speaking about all things Algorand. Yes, you would be familiar with this layer one blockchain, but they've been doing quite a bit lately, and it's time to catch up with them for an update. So firstly, let's introduce two members of that team. We have the COO. His name is Sean Ford. Sean, thank you for being here, mate.
Thank you for having me, Brad.
You're very welcome. And also we have the CPO. His name is Paul Regal. Paul, thank you also for making time to speak with us about what Algorand's doing.
My pleasure. Thanks, Brad.
You're welcome. Now, gentlemen, in the name of transparency, which is something very important to me, it's important all the community know I do not own Algorand, perhaps a mistake of mine right now. And also, it's important you know that this is purely about education and this is entirely free. This is about making sure we all get information, quality information from the source. Now, gentlemen, Algorand is not something unknown. Everyone knows right now that layer one blockchains are an important part of the landscape, and you certainly have been making sure you're iterating at present times. So let's pull it back, though, to the beginning. For anyone unfamiliar with Algorand, and both of you obviously have your expertise in various areas, but frictionless finance, that's the important term right now, and so much more technologically that underpins this. But would either of you like to comment on providing a nutshell statement? What is Algorand and why does it matter?
Sure. So Algorand is, I think, one of the first sort of next generation blockchain protocols that ultimately, was the brainchild of Silvio Micali, Turing Award winner, as well as a team of other very accomplished technical professionals out of MIT and a number of other universities around the world. The vision was really to try to create what was disruptive technology, but make it into something that would be widely adopted, usable, scalable, actually get to a place that it would improve the end user's experience, whether that's individuals or businesses, rather than detract from it. And by doing that, it sort of manifested in a lot of the things that we've put into the protocol. But at the top level, it's really, having the scale and the security and really being decentralized, both to emphasize security and participation in a way that previous blockchains hadn't been. And so, why does Algorand matter? I think, certainly there's a lot of examples in current day people could point to in the financial world of centralized authorities having disproportionate amounts of power to the exclusion of what we'd call in the press the little guy, and sort of give the ability for the everyday person to be able to participate in economic systems with economic products. And in really better themselves and create a better future for themselves. And so Algorand really from the beginning was designed to be very broadly adoptable, permissionless, low barriers to participation, and as such, bringing it back to frictionless finance, really remove a lot of the things that got in the way of people being able to transact and exchange value effectively, that really overweighted that authority and that power to more centralized authorities rather than handing it back to the broader masses and the people who want to participate.
Got it. Okay. So obviously you're competing in a highly competitive arena, but you did come out relatively early when we look at others that are not even out yet. So in that respect, you mentioned some important words. Permissionless is a key feature. Then we talk about the PoS model. That's obviously built into the integrity of several leading blockchains right now and platforms. But there's a lot more built into the engine as well we're going to explore today. Now, one of the things I'd like to talk about is the team. Firstly, you mentioned Silvio, who is a very, very respected and highly regarded, world-renowned engineer and developer and coder, more importantly. But what about the rest of the team? That's what I really want to get in the guts of. Some of the team perhaps we don't know about since we last spoke, and I spoke with Steve, the CEO. How is that developing? How is that growing? And what are the expertise of the different members that really bring it together to make this work?
So just quickly, I would say that we had the benefit of beginning, as we said, with Silvio, who's one of the OGs of modern day cryptography, and so because of that, he brought, I think, an incredibly talented technical team. So the challenge has been a couple of fronts. One is build a business team that approximates that same quality. So I think Brad, you've talked to Steve Kokinos, who's the CEO, and he's founded a number of companies. I joined fairly early after being in a number of startups as well as large scale tech organizations. Paul, came in soon after and brings a lot of expertise just around, adding some discipline and credibility to the delivery of actual tech and product in the world that we live in, which wasn't always the case. And so we've really emphasized building out, people that understand how to create, economic incentives, built out, obviously a number of people in the technical team that Paul can talk about, advisors that have come in to help us from the outside. Paul Milgram, for example, who won the Nobel Prize in economics this past year as one of our economic advisors. We've added him to a very illustrious group of people who help contribute to how we think about approaching and solving problems. Mm-hmm. So, the Algorand team has grown to, we're north of 60, 70 people and are really trying to double down to continue to develop really innovative and disruptive tech. And that's one of the things that Paul has the lead for.
Well, Paul, take it away, mate. What are your thoughts of building on what Sean's saying with regard to some of the key assets in the team right now, especially that you're coming out of the blocks and really showcasing what you can do with use cases and, more importantly, with applications that are being built on Algorand?
Yeah, I mean, so from a team perspective, we build on the things that you would expect in the blockchain space. So distributed systems, networking performance, database performance, those kinds of skills, cryptography implementers, that kind of thing. And to your point, those are the kind of foundational skills that we need to not just create a highly performant blockchain, but to create a smart contract platform that can support and kind of bring forward the kinds of use cases that you're talking about, whether they're DeFi or they're the non-fungible space or any of the others that are really starting to catch fire.
Yeah, and what I like about Algorand, I will say, is that you took the time, having known this protocol and obviously of Silvio when it was just emerging. I really was studying not just Toterim, but a lot of things that were happening around him. Since then, you've clearly been head down, bum up as a team, pardon the phrase, but that's just the reality. And you didn't rush these things. And that's what I think a lot of people have been looking for, making sure you get this team right and continue to move forward until you're ready. So in that vein, let's discuss the tech features, because they are arguably the things that set you apart. The first one is the ASC1, your smart contracts. They differentiate from all others, as I understand. So do either of you want to discuss that in detail?
Yeah, I could take that. And I guess the one thing I want to say about taking our time, we definitely have a very strong research core, led by Silvio and other PhDs in that area. But I think one of the things that sets us apart is not just having the research core, but balancing that with delivering software. While we want to make sure we get it right, we also want to make sure we are pushing features to the market. And I think that's been reflected in the advancement of the protocol since the launch about 2.5 years ago.
Yes.
So let's talk about some of the features themselves. So you mentioned ASC1s, which are Algorand Smart Contracts at layer 1, and they differentiate in a couple of ways. So the first one is the speed. So we don't have sort of second-class citizens when it comes to transaction types. Everything runs at wire speed. Everything runs at the full 1,000 transactions plus a second that Algorand supports, and that includes the smart contracts. So that's one very big difference right off the bat. Coupled with that is the cost of the smart contracts. So similar to the speed, the cost is the same as well. Whether you're sending a simple payment transaction or you're calling the most complicated smart contract on the chain, it is the exact same cost, which is currently a milli algo, which is on the order of 1/20 of a cent, half a cent, something like that.
So cheap and fast comparatively.
Yeah, that's right. So it's very cheap, very fast. And so then the question becomes, well, what about expressivity, right? Like, can I actually build anything interesting here? And the answer is absolutely. The folks that are building on Algorand are building everything from, a Uniswap type AMM to a MakerDAO type collateralized loan system with a stablecoin built in, to NFT type solutions. It really runs the gamut. Opulus was an application that just launched recently as well, doing collateralized loans against music rights, which is a very cool application. And all of these things can be built on Algorand and take advantage of that speed and cost. And I think that's a really big thing that is catching the eyes of developers, not only that are coming into blockchain and looking for, hey, which blockchain should I be building on, But even for those that are already in the space and they already have applications and are suffering from some of the downsides of the underlying platform that they're on.
It's a great point. And also, the fact that you are fundamentally faster and you're working on the scaling solutions as well compared to other blockchains and cheaper. That's a big deal when it comes to business and those entries now. You mentioned Opulus as one example. So are you finding now that because you've made the effort to really build this properly, and you see also there's a genuine market right now and a big buzz for blockchain and even crypto, are you seeing more of a transition or more devs coming towards Algorand because of those real things? Because we want to see this application, we want to see this protocol build into something that is valuable for business and enterprise and for the future of not just DeFi but CeFi and everything between.
Yeah, absolutely. And so I'll say two things. Like one, I think sure, people definitely recognize the underlying tech and gives them an advantage in their business. It's a tangible, adds to their value prop and their bottom line when they're building applications. But I think they also see that, we are about building enduring value. We are about getting it right. We're here for the long haul. And people are responding to that in terms of, when they're looking for an underlying blockchain to basically be a technology partner with, in the way that you can partner with a public and permissionless blockchain. But it's an important part of their stack and they want to have confidence in the underlying tech. And I think we're providing that as well.
Yes, I would agree. Let's explore that further. And congratulations on how far you've come with the tech. Now, one of the things we need to understand more is the ASA, the Algorand Standards Assets. It's an important component. So do either of you want to take that away and give us some more information on what that is?
I can take that as well. When we were looking at building tokenization models within the platform, we looked at throughout the market and saw what was out there. And basically what we saw was there's a huge proliferation of standards around assets. But as it turns out, most people aren't using this huge proliferation. 70% of the market is using very few of the features. And in order to get them, you must write code, you must write a smart contract. And so they're copying, pasting, or they're trying to come up with a shorter way to be able to do that. And the complexity bar is a little bit high. And so what we wanted to do is take that and find a way to just cut out all of the complexity. And so what we came up with was what we call the Algorand Standard Asset, or the ASA. And that standard asset has the capabilities to mimic, just for frame of reference, the ERC20 standard, the ERC721 standard. You can do fungible, you can do non-fungible, you can do restricted tokens. And all of that is done with a single transaction to the network with 5 or 6 parameters, and your ASA is created. So it's actually at layer one, just like those smart contracts, it's at layer one. And so what does that give you? It gives you the same security model with your tokenized asset that we have with a native algo on the platform. It gives you the same speed. So just like with the smart contracts, you can transact with these assets at 1,000 plus transactions a second. The cost is the same. And so the complexity has really just dropped out of tokenizing an asset on blockchains. And we've gotten just really a huge response, honestly, from folks that are in the business of tokenizing assets, or that's a major part of what they're trying to do. The ease at which they can do that on Algorand and the speed and cost, it's really been a differentiator with the way people are approaching us.
Absolutely. And the standardization, will that apply to other blockchains as well? Because you mentioned Ethereum's various tokens as well, but clearly you're agnostic, I would imagine, in terms of your technical perspective, being a layer one as well. So will there be composability or compatibility or interoperability built into the future of Algorand as you network out into other layer ones?
Yeah, 100%. So we're a big believer in a multi-chain network. A multi-chain world. And we also believe that not only will it be many chains, but there's different reasons to be different places, and you're going to want to move around. And so, we've taken a really hard look at what's out there in the market in terms of bridges, both token bridges, so moving assets from chain to chain, but also, general message passing, whether that's I'm trying to trigger a smart contract on another chain and get a result back and use that on my chain. And there's a big spectrum there in terms of how these bridges are being implemented, from completely centralized bridges, which often make sense depending on the use case, to folks that are trying to get more and more decentralized. We have some technology coming out on our side that will allow building of completely trustless bridges in terms of understanding Algorand state that allow us to effectively have a portable cryptographic proof that is very, very small, that you can, with certainty, know the state on Algorand. So think of it as the blockchain attests to its own state rather than having to say, hey, validator set or otherwise, please tell me what the state is on Algorand. You can do it directly through the chain. And that's just an example of how we're thinking about the interoperability problem. It can't just be on folks trying to build interoperability solutions. The layer one protocols have to be involved in this and have to have some ownership on making it easier and more trustless for these bridges in between.
Got it.
So
and
that's one of the things.
Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm sorry. So I would step back if I may, give me a second. So I think, all of these things, I agree with Paul and how he's describing them. And I think, Brad, it comes back to something that you mentioned earlier, which is just thinking about friction and how that has gotten in the way of really, driving a lot of the components of what we see as where finance is headed. So just the reason that we're building what we're building, and I think the thing that's driving it is that what we saw was a couple of things. One, a real opportunity for the right type of blockchain with the right capabilities to be able to play in the financial world broadly. If you're too slow or you fork or there's all sorts of problems with the tech, no financial institution with any degree of credibility is going to jump right in and start to invest and try to transform how they either conduct their process, build their assets, et cetera.
Yeah, and let's talk about, Sean, let's talk about that in the context. No, I want to keep going. I'm sorry to interrupt, but there's a point about CeFi in what you're saying. That's what I wanted to just add in.
That's where I'm headed. So
sure, go ahead.
Yeah, go ahead. No, go ahead, Brad.
I was just going to say that often we use terminology in the blockchain space as buzzwords, but the reality is there's a continuum between DeFi and CeFi, and you're positioning yourself right across that spectrum, I would argue.
Absolutely. So you took the words out of my mouth. So, it's really funny. What we're seeing is, and the reason we're building what we're building and the reason we're building the way we're building is based on what I'm about to say, which is we're seeing a massive convergence. If you look at DeFi, CeFi, central banks, and governments, all of them are coming together and really starting to create what we're calling a future of finance. What is the future of finance going to be? It's going to be inclusive. It's going to be decentralized. It's going to be trusted, right? It's going to be secure, all of these different things. And it's going to be easy to participate. And if you start thinking about that, that general belief of where finance is going has driven a lot of the principles Paul talked about. But, the interesting thing from our perspective is that the walls between what DeFi being a separate component of finance doesn't really make any sense anymore.
Exactly.
It's a part of finance. And the other interesting thing is because of blockchain technology, it's fundamentally, especially with Algorand, redefining what finance is and where you would find finance. So let me give you the example. Let's say you think about, 15 years ago, if you talk about finance sectors, you're not really going to say online gaming comes to mind. And that's because it seems like, that's an interesting industry, but not a financial economy. And now you're looking at games that have tens of millions of users who are creating assets in the game, trading those assets for real currency and cryptocurrency, and it has become an economy. And so within video games, for example, there are micro economies that are larger in some cases than some countries. And so if you start thinking about finance as exchanging value securely, seamlessly, and effortlessly, breaking barriers down, then DeFi becomes an integrated part of CeFi and central banks. They start to take on some of those processes. DeFi becomes more trusted by taking on some of the things we see from CeFi. And to your point, I think Algorand is right at the intersection between what people used to define finance as and where finance is going. And we become the bridge that allows people to migrate back and forth between those two things, making them sort of one ecosystem rather than a bunch of fragmented parts.
That's really well said. And I think people should actually take that piece and record it and play it back a few times, because really it's about revolutionizing finance in this context. And perhaps OpenFi is going to be more of an apt term in the future, because even DeFi is conflating with CeFi. When we look even at the tech stack, when we look at exactly how they run, not everything even claimed to be DeFi is, because by nature, they're moving in the direction of business, they're moving in the direction of enterprise and utility and users. So there's a lot of things going on, and you're not going to miss either anywhere in that pie or that opportunity as well, because you're situated where you are attractive to all those different components and industries, I suppose, all the way from the enterprise to the government to that, hardcore DeFi maximalist. I think it's attractive for different people in different ways. But let's pull it back a bit. One of the things that Paul said recently was about that stateless to state value prop with the bridging. That, I think, is something that we need to explore a little bit more, because that's a big deal when it comes to being able to work with and appease the other layer one blockchain. So let's start with Ethereum, gentlemen. Are you currently, or any of the devs in the team, liaising, working with, and making sure that there's that co-opetition, but also collaboration between various L1s too, because they have the network effects right now, gentlemen, and Polkadot's obviously building as well. So how do you collab? How do you build, narratives that mean something together?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. So certainly we are up to date and keeping up to date and looking at changes and approaches. It's a little bit harder in something like Ethereum to be like, who do I call over there to talk to, right? But certainly we are involved in the process of making sure we understand where they're headed, to make sure that we can converge at the points that are necessary. With folks like Polkadot, it's a little bit different, and I think there is a big opportunity there to talk to the folks that are actually building over there, and making sure that that we're converging around some sort of standards. One of the promises of blockchain is this open and permissionless world, and currently that's true, but only within your blockchain, right? And so these bridges are important, but the layer one chains do need to have accountability over it, and that's what I think we're doing. And to your point of like, how do you maintain those sort of connections with those other chains? I think it's just time and effort, and making sure that we're doing similar things. The other thing about it is, I would guess that we would probably not get to a state where the blockchains are going to directly interact, for any number of reasons, technical and otherwise. And so there's always going to be folks that are providing value add in between, whether it's via a validator network from a company like Ren or like Axelar, or a bridge like CodeFi, and Consensus, or some other sort of solutions. And so the important part to me is that layer ones are taking it seriously, and just doing their jobs in terms of helping those guys out and making those solutions more trusted or more trustless, depending on your point of view.
I couldn't agree more. And also to that point, we've seen a lot of layer one white papers in 2017-18, but not many made it through. And now we see a very small number that have iterated, continued, even in that bear market. It was a tough time. With your runway, luckily you had that, but some just didn't survive, or some didn't emerge and still haven't yet, with a huge runway, arguably. So congratulations once again for being one of those leading layer ones. It does matter that we can see specific use cases for different, protocols. Yours seems to be very enterprise geared as much as it is for these new and leading applications coming on board. Now there's a big wave of applications in Algorand we're sensing, and we'll talk about that later. But let's go back to the atomic transfers and rekeying, those two other parts that need to be discussed in terms of the technical value that underpins the protocol.
Yeah, sure. So, I'll take those. So atomic transfers are the ability within Algorand to atomically transfer assets, both from a large number of different assets, but also like multi-sender, multi-receiver. So you can basically package up any number of transactions. If any of them fail, they all fail. And while that's not particularly revolutionary from a concept, it does do a couple of things. On Algorand, and you've heard me say this before, this is at layer one. So it's not smart contract. I'm not building a smart contract and grouping transactions and running the smart contract. This is a layer one primitive that can be used as a building block in any number of ways by any number of people. And so what does that mean? That means it's fast. That means it's cheap. It runs just like any other transaction on the network. So very powerful as a layer one primitive and easy to use, can be put into applications where needed. And this is super important for folks. I mean, for folks, even, you know, the easiest example is something like a bank settlement, where you need to make sure that the transfers going in and out both happen, and atomic transfers do that. Massive reduction in counterparty risk in a very easy way.
Got it.
On the rekeying side, so rekeying is something that's super interesting. A number of use cases, particularly around folks with high security needs, like custody providers, et cetera. But the idea is very simple. So in cryptography, you've got a public address with a private key. And what do you do if you feel like your private key might be compromised? What would you stress?
You'd stress.
You stress, right? Maybe you spin up a new address, send all your money over to the new address. I'm like,
exactly.
aha, I'm good now.
Yeah.
Well, okay, so that's a reasonable thing to do, and it solves this sort of security issue. But let's just make a quick sort of mental map here. What if you had to change your bank account every day or every week? Not only is that a big pain, which blockchain makes easier because it's much easier just to spin up a new address and transfer it. But the bad part isn't necessarily the operational overhead for you. It's how many people do you have tied to that address, to that bank account that you're either making payments from, or you've registered it with KYC or whatever the thing is that has been attached to your public address that is now gone and you have a new one. And let's say you're a custody provider. That sort of doubles down on this problem, because anytime there's a transaction out, I got to sweep all the money into a new account, right? So you get this big string of public addresses changes, and it just creates this wake in order to get the security value of changing keys. And so what does rekeying do? Rekeying allows you to change the underlying key that allows you to spend and keep the same public address. So in the case of, hey, I'm not sure that I'm comfortable with the security over my private key, you don't have to change your address at all. You send a transaction, rekey the account. It's a very literal name. We weren't particularly clever with that one. Rekey that account to a new spending account. Now you've got your safety. You have zero operational overhead, and it just makes it easier. And so this is another feature that, again, is at layer one. And in fact, it's built into, you can do it inside of a pay transaction. So you can literally keep your keys cold all the time. It's another building block that runs fast, cheap, and is a building block for companies to use inside of their applications to gain additional value in a very simple way.
And I think, adding to that, Paul, the fact that you've done that and built that into the very base of the protocol means that more mainstream people can come in with that peace of mind and with an easier experience, because you want to build the protocol out for real use case. And if you've done the rekeying right from the outset, I think that's going to be, a significant boon for the whole development cycle and the increase in the usage and adoption of Algorand. And obviously, just, looking at the flexibility and the continuity, they're two buzzwords that come out when you look exploring the rekeying. Arguably, this could iterate even further.
Yeah, I mean, and just to be kind of put a fine point on it, we have a very intentional technical strategy to have layer one primitives, to make it easy, to take away a lot of the complexity, and make it very easy, fast, and cheap. Now, that is you could go wrong there by just putting everything in layer one. Right. And then, I've got this thing that is only useful in this particular area because I didn't do the right work to generalize it down. And so that's why I say it's very intentional. One, we know that this is a strategy we want to do. We want to keep things in layer one to make it easy. But two, we have to be really smart about it and really generalize these features out. And so the things that we have are the things that have the most generalizable power, can be used in the most ways with the most value. And really, I think have been received well by folks that are building on Algorand.
Absolutely. And Sean, I wanted to ask you about the next question that relates directly to the tech, and that is, how do you build out those partnerships? How do you build out and scale for use case? Because it's one thing to have everything ready and finite, as Paul's saying, and really hone in on those key assets that you need technologically. But that's nothing if you haven't got, the right tool suite and the right approach. And then, the right applications coming on, especially in that first wave that seems to be happening now. So let's discuss, organizing partnerships, how, and making sure that things are ready in that sense, and even just applications themselves.
Right. That's a good point. So I think, it speaks back to something that Paul referenced earlier on, which was just the idea that we're here to build enduring value. And I think we're here to build a very credible and growing and sort of vibrant economy. And so if you start thinking about partnerships and applications and the types of assets that you add through that filter, you really start to hone in on not the universe, while anyone can come, but in terms of allocating our time and effort has really been around finding partners and assets that will allow us to build the best infrastructure from an economic perspective that exists in the industry today. And so what does that mean? Well, at the end of the day, what we've seen is we've probably got, I would say 20 to 25 different stable coins that we have, been lucky enough to have on Algorand. Obviously, there's USDC, USDT. There's an Australian gold-backed stablecoin called MELD,
Yes.
which is backed by the Melbourne Mint, and they're very innovative. And we've got a number of digital versions of actual currencies. You've seen the signing a partner called Monerium, which is actually digital money in Europe. There's the euro, there's the pound. So we're seeing a combination of actual very, very solid means of exchange. Same thing goes with the types of assets that are being built. There's a lot built. There's a number of organizations that are in that CeFi space that are starting to find ways to tokenize or create digital products within their sort of financial portfolio. One is looking to build, a structured product against second mortgages in residential homes. Very massive amount of value there that they want to unlock and tokenize that tranche of loans. And there's a list of other folks that are looking to do similar things, whether it's tokenizing parts of their funds. One public announcement that we made some time ago, which is a really interesting case study, is the World Chess Organization is slated to do their IPO on Algorand. It'll be a hybrid IPO with us and with the London Stock Exchange. So we're seeing elements of convergence with those quality, regulated, good team, credible ecosystem partners that are coming to us more and more and more. And I think that, that again speaks to the quality of the product that we're building, but also speaks to the philosophy that we're using around the types of people that we want to be a part of the economy, so that when we activate a lot of the exchange that we're starting to see, there's a lot to work with, and people have confidence that they know they're coming to a growing and healthy ecosystem.
Yeah, and on that note, I mean, Paul, you might like to add onto this. There's a whole suite of, information and resources relating to the use case component, and it itemizes different industries, different verticals, where you really can see the potential of this. And even right now, the experimentation happening with building this out. And in that context, I wanted to ask you also, do you see, given that now mainstream businesses are tinkering with this, and even beyond that, clearly they see the value proposition of blockchain, but do you think that also, what's paramount to them is even beyond the blockchain itself? It's what those applications can do. It's so much more than just a blockchain. We hear that word used so much, but even in Algorand, that's just one component in itself.
For sure. I mean, I think most folks don't really, particularly larger businesses that we're talking to, aren't saying, hey, we would like to add blockchain to our products, like help us figure out what that means. They're saying we need to enable these properties. We need to enable and reach this new type of customer. We need to be able to accomplish these use cases, and we know we can do that with you guys. So, I mean, I think to your point, Brand, it's not about I need the technology. It's about I need the value props and the properties that the underlying technology actually provides.
Got it. And Sean, what about revenue?
I would add one.
Can you teach us a bit about that?
I'm sorry, go ahead, Brad.
Oh, no, mate, add it. Please, go ahead. I've been rude and interrupted again.
This is your show.
Well, no, mate, I wanted to ask, please add that information because it's valuable, because you are the source and that's what it's about. But in the context of, really making sure the mainstream can get those, can enter into this and remove those barriers of entry by the protocol, surely, the premise or one of the focus of the Algorand team is to build profit as well and be revenue generating, even though there's the permissionless open source context of the protocol. So differentiating between the protocol and the business. I want to ask about that. And please go ahead with your comment as well, Sean.
I guess what I was I'll just answer this question. I think that if you look at the sources of revenue, and I would say that the same way that we brought, I think, in terms of product discipline and delivery of product to market predictably, Silvio likes to say promise made, promise kept. I think that's something that we've done a very good job of as a protocol, really setting ourselves apart, I think, from a number of others in the industry. And that same attitude as it relates to developing product, the discipline has been brought in, I think, by the business team to say, well, how do we start to generate a business here? The business is not, let's build a protocol and let's launch a currency and the game's over, which we also see a lot of in the space. Ours has always been, how do we build the best technical, sort of foundation that is out there today? And then how, as a company, do we start to pivot towards being a project that built a core protocol to a company that is building interesting ways to use the core protocol or build on the core protocol?
Right.
And we do that with, we've got a number of, I would call, additional business ideas that we are actively working on and that we'll announce and love to talk to you about in the future that we think are revenue generating. We do, have a number of opportunities. We are working on something called a co-chain that Sylvia wrote a paper on, and that, we see opportunity there. And then, we make investments as well, across a number of fronts. So I feel like, we are trying to build the same diversification of business discipline into the company that we brought with the product discipline as we started launching technology that we think appeal to the different constituents we were talking about earlier.
Right. And what's great is that the token itself, often various teams, in the space who are perhaps less transparent, they don't like to touch on the token. But in this instance, you see that protocol to enterprise or protocol to business crossover. And that token does genuinely represent both worlds. It literally is the fuel, that protocol fuel that moves into the potential for experimentation and use right across the whole spectrum and potential of, I guess the platform is the better word in this instance because it represents the platform, not just that protocol. Now, in that context, I wanted to ask either of you if you could comment a bit more on the staking rewards that are built in, because that's a feature that comes in with a lot of the PoS models, as you'd appreciate, and it really does also factor in for more of the logic that's built into the tokenomics and the token design.
Yeah, I can speak to it from a technical perspective, but we're not involved in the tokenomics or any. But
it was just the staking one to talk about, because that has a real effect right across the platform.
Yeah, for sure. So the way the rewards work technically in the Algorand blockchain is we reward basically for holding algos. And so, from a standpoint of the behavior that we're looking for is participation in the Algorand sort of ecosystem. And that's the model that we have now. Silvio's put out a governance proposal to the foundation and to the community to look at, which is a little bit more involved in terms of staking and some additional rewards there, like specifically locking up tokens over multi-month, multi-year kind of periods. And having that tie towards additional monetary governance or policy governance in the blockchain, but that's at the proposal state right now. Okay. So in terms of the actual the current rewards, it's really about participating in the ecosystem.
Okay, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
I think the thing that I would underline is the goal here and the way the protocol was designed from the beginning was to sort of rapidly decentralize and do it, however, in a responsible way. And decentralization in this particular context is one of broad participation, broad voting, broad interest, to Paul's point. And I think that, the foundation ultimately is responsible for these things. Anyone in the community can make a proposal and make suggestions on how to make that happen. But ultimately, the goal is participation and engagement of the community. And that's what I think has been the underpinning of how things have been structured to this point by the foundation. And I expect that if anyone's watching this that has an idea in the community and they want to make a proposal, I would encourage them to do so.
And that's what's great about that underlying consensus as well. Sorry, the consensus algorithm is it was always designed for voting and for democracy from the outset. And I think that's also what's attractive even in DeFi right now, because it resonates with that democratic and decentralized tenant. With regard to the tool suites, I wanted to ask you, Paul, consensus, it acts as a tool suite and toolbox for Ethereum. We have Parity, that really supports the work that's being done in Polkadot. What about Algorand? What's being done there? Is there a specific entity that really can build out the toolbox for Algorand as you keep going forward?
Yeah. So, I mean, from a perspective of the technology, similar to Parity for Polkadot, I think that's a reasonable analogy for Algorand Inc., that we are building the technology and continuing to move that technology forward. Consensus, on the other hand, is a little bit of a different model. They're almost sort of like an investment model. And I can pass off to Sean for the various things available in our ecosystem that are more similar to a model like Consensus.
Okay. So, Sean, if you want to take that away, because my understanding was that Consensus is also involved in various technical toolboxes and endorsing things and supporting things like Truffle, etc., working with teams and devs.
It should be like grants or VC arms and those kinds of things.
Yeah, so I think that, there's a whole bunch of different things that people can do. I mean, look, at the end of the day, again, the foundation's job is to establish sort of clear principles for the the token economics and monetary policy, and then encourage, I think, in the right way, people to engage and start to build on the protocol. There have been a number of accelerators and a number of things they've done to enable sort of, the average developer to start to get up and get going through grants. There's a formal process there. I know that there's, also a number of other infrastructure investments that they've made to enhance the capabilities of the protocol and the ability for people to join and participate. There are, and then there's a number of partners that participate as well, that are a part of a very broad partner program to help get people going, get them ramped up, get them developing, whether it's a developer or whether it's a large business. So I think across the system, to be fair, I think we're really starting to see more and more organic development by companies that are coming in that we don't have to direct. Which is really the part that I find probably most exciting, because when you first start, you're really working and trying to sort of get everyone to come in, but focusing on not the ocean but parts of the ocean. And I think now that we're seeing outreach and people coming to us and starting to just build, and we find assets that have been built, it's really sort of starting to show, I think, the power of both the incentives that are in place by the foundation as well as the participation and consensus really starting to expand rapidly.
Yeah, I think you're making me think, as you're explaining this, the metaphor of water. Really, you're the water to the many islands around the world that are emerging. It's tinkering with the technology, and it's literally permeating right through across the globe over time. Now, what about the state of the GitHub, for example? You are proudly permissionless and open source in many respects, but you are also trying to build out the business side of this for businesses to be that sort of source, the code that can be adopted. So how transparent is everything? If a dev wants to go in and start to explore what Algorand is?
Yeah, 100%. So we are 100% open source. We are using approved OSI licenses. OSS licenses. So we're, anyone can go in and play around and fork it and play, or add their own PRs, and however they want to get involved. We do have a pretty involved developer site, developer.algorand.org, which allows people to sort of get up to speed on how to not only how Algorand works, but how to build on top. So I would suggest starting there, but for sure they could go straight to our GitHub and get in there. We love it.
Well, Paul, we've seen recently a lot of rug pulls. We've seen a lot of forking. We've seen a lot of infighting, especially with the emergence of governance tokens and liquidity mining, that sort of thing. So does it ever worry you, though, that the code itself can be forked and people can use this in different parts of the world, as we've seen as well, as opposed to just making sure that things are proprietary and are protected, which would not be in the spirit of that continuum CeFi to DeFi?
Yeah. I mean, I think there's a couple of ways to look at this. You know, a lot of the forking and the so-called, vampire attacks that we've seen recently are really more about DeFi applications than they are about layer one infrastructure. Because, when you're talking about layer one infrastructure, it's complicated. It's complicated. It's hard. Not to like move forward, but just to keep it up and running and working right. And moving it forward is a whole other thing. And I think we've seen, examples in the ecosystem of forks at the layer one level, but they're mostly, Bitcoin related. And even there, you haven't seen a whole lot of like value flow. I think the bottom line is if you're going to run a layer one blockchain, you better know what you're doing. And if you really know what you're doing, you're probably going to build your own because, you're a really smart person and you probably have strong opinions.
Yeah.
I think if you are building a product that is open source, or I'm sorry, that is meant to build a borderless economy and to enable frictionless finance, people have to be able to trust it, especially if it's decentralized. No one's in charge. Yeah. If you're not open source, and frankly, if you're not using, sort of a standard license, I think that's something to be concerned about if I was a user of that system.
Absolutely. And it's great to know that you are that layer one and you're sophisticated and complex tech, because as you've made it very clear, it's very unlikely that there's going to be success in anyone forking this, which gives a lot of people peace of mind when they question that, knowing that they've seen applications that have forked. Now, what about the licensing or the regulation? That's a tough one. And I know from the start, you guys definitely took this very seriously. You had to. And regulated also in the US, as I understand. So congratulations on that. That's a serious achievement, given so many are not. So in that regard, what about regulation, and compliance? I wanted to touch on that globally. Have you made sure you've crossed all your T's, dotted all your I's, so that you can make sure that in every industry, every area of the globe, you can be competitive and you can permeate, those regions?
Yeah. I think we've taken that incredibly serious from the beginning. The way we've structured, sort of all aspects of the organization has been to, follow and go well beyond whatever requirements exist in whatever jurisdiction. So I think, again, back, Brad, to if you have serious people that have built businesses before, understand how to build businesses and build enduring value, I think, we took all the steps to make sure that this was going to be handled in the right way, and took it incredibly seriously and continue to do so for sure. That's
good to know. Now, gentlemen, I wanted to get really deep into what's happening right now. I mean, we talked perhaps a little bit too much, my apologies, on all of the tech, but that is that core integrity that we need to know is definitely working well right now. And from that, it is everything that comes forth 2021 and beyond. So we discussed the term use case, and there's a whole lot of different potentials there, from collateralized loan obligations, credit, atomic swaps. We talked about that, subscriptions, escrow, and so much more, automation of disbursements. So in that sense, what excites you both most? If you could think of one thing that really is predominant right now that's coming forth, where the devs and the enterprises are starting to really play, what would it be? Because we certainly see that happen with Ethereum with things like social tokens, NFTs as their buzzwords. Surely you have your own.
Well, I was going to start with a slightly different theme, but on point, I think, which is the thing that excites me the most about Algorand and the way we've brought, and what we're seeing because of, I think, the way that the tech is and the way the ecosystem is the ability for anybody to participate. I mean, if you go back and look at, early Algorand messaging, it was about banking the unbanked. There was a lot of discussion about that as an example of how do you give equal access to anyone in the world that wants to participate in some form of future prosperity. How do you do that? And so that might sound very pie in the sky, and doesn't that sound great? What a wonderful social mission. We talked about it. And now the thing that excites me is we are seeing it with traditional financial institutions, central banks, governments starting to realize they need to harness the potential of their people, their customers, and expand those markets in ways that actually make it easier, not harder for those people to participate in. And so if you look at our use cases, we see dozens of traditional multinational banks. On every continent, we see multiple governments. I mean, we're engaged with 12 or so different central banks and governments. And these aren't just, well, we had an email exchange, just as we're actively in the middle of POC and or figuring out ways to roll this out to answer these questions. And if you look at the DeFi space, it's the same thing. The creative energy in DeFi that is being done appropriately and responsibly and looking towards that adoption is just unbelievable. So I get excited thinking about all the people who are going to be able to participate in financial success. And I think that that's the thing that that really motivates me every day.
Okay, Sean, I'm going to push you harder here because you know more than what you're telling. Now, clearly, we're talking about MOUs. We're talking about all kinds, obviously NDAs with different companies. You're working with a lot, you know, from the government down, enterprise across. So give us a bit more of a picture of what you do know with specifics, because all the use case lists are there. You're certainly moving forward with this new wave. And I stress this because it is so exciting when you see that first wave in that first year of all these applications starting to really flood in and showcase proof of utility and proof of adoption. So come on, Sean.
All right. Well, I mean, look, again, what's been stated publicly is all we can say at this point. I would say, though, that, you know, if you look at yesterday's announcement, Mzaalo, for example, which was it's sort of the easiest way to do it. It's called the Hulu of India. You know, they are looking to create a loyalty token that at its core starts to reward its customers for what they've been historically contributing to digital content, meaning they watch advertisements, they engage in some way in the platform. And this is a way to help flip around that equation instead of having it all sit in one central place where just the people who own the company or launch the company are getting their share. It's the people who are interacting. And, you know, for a country like India, you know, this is a massive market and something that sort of accomplishes what I just described, certainly in digital content consumption and engagement. And there's real rewards there. You know, we've talked publicly about the Marshall Islands and them launching the first, sort of digital currency. Right now they're on the US dollar, where they're looking to expand that relationship. And sort of their position globally by having their own currency, and they chose Algorand to do that. I would say that, you know, if you look in the DeFi space, we've announced a number of regulated either security tokens or participants in that space that you can go take a look at, that I think form the underpinning. So I would just say, you know, Brad, here's what I will say. In the next 2 months or so, let's check back in. I think there's a bunch of pretty big, pretty interesting things that are going to be announced. And when it happens, you're going to say, oh, that's what Sean was talking about. But I would just hold that Algorand is not a place to pump a bunch of big deals that don't exist out there. I would never do that. We haven't done it in the product. We're not doing it in the business. We've taken a long game approach here, and I think we are right at the cusp of being able to put out a number of I would say fairly disruptive and significant partners that people are going to stand up and take notice to. And I wish I could tell you what they were right now.
Yeah, and you know what? I actually am glad you're not, because really it's not about the FOMO and not about the hype. So we'll make that clear. But at the same time, we've also seen, if we backtrack a little bit, we've seen some of those partnerships emerge. You've already released some, you know, this year. So obviously, Sean, in the context of more recent announcements, you discussed some of the things that, and you hinted there's a lot going forward. But what about those more recent announcements, perhaps, that people could understand are unfolding right now and are relevant in 2021, you know, in the beginning of the year?
Sure. So I think, you know, first there's just to level set. I mean, we've got over 500 different companies that are sort of actively engaged in various stages of building on Algorand right now across the different sectors that we talked about. So there's a fair number there. In terms of the recent announcements, look, I mentioned Mzaalo, which is Xfinite. It's the DApp that is being built first. And so that is a fairly massive opportunity given the partnerships they have, the size of the market in India, the ability to start to engage in real partnerships with a country that has 1.3 billion, some massive number of people who could certainly benefit from a decentralized and permissionless blockchain. So there's that. We also launched, as we talked about, continue to push forward with Meld and their gold-backed stablecoin, and helping to provide transparency in the supply chain, not just for the trading of the stablecoin, but also in the supply chain itself. Announced a company called Instamatch, which is essentially matching lenders and borrowers in a regulated fashion to partner them so that people can find liquidity needs and get what they need around their cash deposits, et cetera. That's a recent announcement. And I think Opulus is something that you mentioned earlier. That's the foundation. Foundation did a grant with Opulus. And really, if you start thinking about artists' rights and the ability to use technology to leverage those rights globally, that is a place for massive innovation and adoption. Again, the same way that Mzaalo is doing it for their content, the people who engage with their content. On the other side of the coin, there's a lot of room to have people at scale be able to have greater ownership over the things that they make and create, and be rewarded appropriately for that. So I think those are just some of the quick, easy ones. If you look, there's been a number of companies that have been announced in the accelerator programs that the foundation has talked about. And so, I think most recently there were 11 that were announced as grant recipients. And I think that's the foundation, but I think people can go there and take a look at those lists. So I do think there's an awful lot of activity, and that's all separate from the long list of what I would call either regulated assets or stable coins that have been issued on Algorand to this point. And so, we're just seeing a massive uptick across all of the different sectors of finance and sectors that are starting to emerge as, organic economies that are building, like gaming and other places. We're seeing the number of sort of traditional, very large businesses in those areas start to really do more than just put a toe in the water. They are jumping in with both feet. And I think Algorand feels like, I know I can speak for, we feel very lucky that we're a key part of helping them do that and helping them sort of transition into what we think is the future of finance, which is about, being decentralized and opening opportunities for everybody.
Right. And Sean and Paul, obviously the time's run out. You both have to go. I did want to say it's great to see that you mentioned the foundation, because when we look at other layer zeros and layer ones, the foundation's really a great hint for grants and things that are coming that do tend to sort of move across into valuable assets for Algorand. So I would encourage those to really, who are paying attention to Algorand, pay attention to the foundation and anything that's built around that. Roadmaps, if you'd like to know more, make sure you do check out all the information, the socials, anything where it's mentioned, because there's a lot more coming. And Sean's already made it very clear that what he's not telling us. With regard to the future of this, one thing I will say, I've been watching that token. I look at that and think, okay, based on the Dutch auction, based on the partners, I'm starting to see more evidence now empirically that things are moving in the direction of utility now that we're at that point where real business is being had. So congratulations there. And finally, I just would like to ask, with regard to the growth and the marketing, I know you don't like hype and, all that FOMO, but are you also taking that seriously so that you can, capture some of that network, those network effects that are all important as you build out?
Yes, of course. I mean, we want people to approach the blockchain space in the same way that Algorand has, which is, very seriously, transparently. And, the more people that hear about Algorand and the way we, I think, have gone to market, I think it sets a nice standard and a bar for anyone else who wants to follow and try to emulate, because I feel pretty good about, the approach we've used and the long game that we've been playing.
Absolutely. Well, gentlemen, thank you for going over time. I know, Paul, you really do have to go. Frictionless finance. Don't forget that slogan. It actually means something. And most importantly, breaking down those misconceptions about, excuse me, DeFi and CeFi. This is about really the continuum, experimenting in this space, making sure it's all relevant from government all the way across to those really die-hard devs in the DeFi space. Congratulations for everything you've done from protocol right through to the platform. I wish you all the very best. And I am very excited to be watching as the wave of applications and experimentations continues in 221 and beyond for Algorand. So thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you
Thanks
so
a lot,
much, Brad.
Appreciate it.
Thank you.